He's one of the most wanted men in America, and you've probably never heard of him. We'll talk about it today on The Hot Zone.
This is The Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, Chuck Holton here. Thanks for watching The Hot Zone. That was Marky. He is stuck here in quarantine with me and my family for the next 30 days here in Panama. Panama has taken a really strong stand against this COVID-19 virus by locking everybody in their homes for the next month, basically shutting everything down. You literally get to go out for an hour a day to go shopping and nothing else. You can't go running, you can't go exercise, you can't leave your house. And, you know, we've got a nice house with a big yard, so I'm really having a vacation. But a lot of people are really suffering down here. I mean, some of the poor people that live in a little shack, they can't leave their yard. They don't have a yard. Or some people who have like a big family and live in the city in a condo, a high rise or something. Imagine being stuck in there for a month and not being able to leave. You go crazy. But they're doing what they have to do to stop this COVID-19 outbreak. Now, if you thought COVID-19 was the deadliest thing to come out of China, you'd be wrong about that. We are going to talk today about fentanyl and some other synthetic drugs that are coming out of China that are killing tens and even hundreds of thousands of people every year. So just to give you an example, fentanyl is now the deadliest drug in America. It kills more people via overdose deaths in America than any other drug, something like 30,000 people a year. Now we're freaking out about 1,000 people dying from the COVID virus, and that's terrible, that's bad. But seriously, fentanyl is killing 30,000 people a year in the United States. That's half of all overdose deaths happening. And a lot of that fentanyl comes from China. Now, Estonia had a big problem with overdose deaths from fentanyl. Part of the reason is because if you don't understand fentanyl, it's an extremely, extremely powerful painkiller. It's 100 times more powerful than morphine. And I mean, just for example, my mother had a bottle of 60 milligram tablets of morphine there toward the end. She died this morning, if you didn't hear. And I really appreciate all your well wishes, everybody that's sent condolences and everything. Thank you very much for that. But she had a bottle of 60 milligram morphine tablets. So that's enough to kill a mule. But fentanyl, 2 milligrams would kill you. So it's incredibly powerful. And a lot of times in street drugs, people are buying what they think is heroin, but it's laced with fentanyl because fentanyl is a lot cheaper to produce. They don't know it, and they end up dying from it. It causes severe respiratory depression, which means you basically just stop breathing if you take too much of it, and you're done. Boom, just like that. So Estonia had a big problem with that, but they made some really good steps in putting a stop to the fentanyl deaths by getting really tough on the pushers. But now they're seeing a new problem, and that is new synthetic drugs coming out of China that they literally can't even identify. These are drugs that have never been heard of before. They've never been categorized before, that are coming out of labs in China. And that's one thing China is becoming famous for, is these sort of bootleg chemical labs that are turning out stuff nobody's ever even seen or heard of. And so the COVID virus is really the least of our worries when it comes to China. We need to go after China for allowing this kind of experimentation and exportation of drugs all over the world. It's killing hundreds of thousands of people a year. Check this out about Estonia.
Estonia is a good case study to examine. Estonia, to our knowledge, is the only mature fentanyl market that exists on Earth.
Now we are in the situation after we have won the war on drugs, that we have new drugs on the market. We don't some drugs we cannot even recognize what they are.
Estonia in about 2000, 2001 saw a pretty substantial contraction in the supply of heroin. The Taliban poppy ban that came into place right around then really put constraints on the supply of heroin to Europe. For whatever reason, Estonia was then supplied by fentanyl.
People started to look for other options. We saw increase in stimulant use and new synthetic substances came to market.
Really, this is a new era. The numbers of substances, in terms of the number of new chemicals coming out of China and India now, is really putting a lot of pressure on the existing kind of infrastructure of our drug policy.
The worst case scenario is that we are not ready to address the threats that the new substances pose. People will start dying again in greater numbers, and we are not able to help.
His name is Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, or commonly referred to by his alias, El Mencho. He's a Mexican drug lord and leader in the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG. He's the most wanted criminal in Mexico and one of the most wanted in the United States. There's a reward on his head for more than $10 million by the DEA and the Mexican government. And they're just looking for information that will lead to his arrest, so you might be able to make some money. He's wanted for drug trafficking, organized crime involvement, and illegal possession of firearms, among other things. The CJNG is a brutal operation that spans the Americas, Europe, Asia, Africa, really all over the world. And under his command, the CJNG has become one of Mexico's leading crime organizations. El Mencho was born in Mexico to an avocado farmer and then dropped out of elementary school before immigrating illegally to the United States in the 1980s. Then he was arrested there several times and then deported to Mexico in the early 1990s, where he went to work for another drug cartel called the Mileno Cartel. He eventually climbed to the top of that criminal organization and then founded his organization, the CJNG, after most of the other leaders were captured or killed. El Mencho is known for being an aggressive and absolutely brutal leader. The violence that his cartel reigns on both the United States and Mexico against Mexican security forces and civilians, they brought him increased government attention and an extensive manhunt across our two countries. Security forces suspect he's been hiding in the rural areas outside Jalisco and guarded by an army of mercenary thugs. The DEA recently wrapped up a 6-month investigation aimed at taking him down. And it was a very successful operation from the standpoint of the fact that they arrested more than 600 people. A couple of weeks ago, agents from the DEA and other federal agencies made these raids across several U.S. states and in Mexico, arresting suspected drug members. So take a look at what they had to say.
Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG, is the single criminal organization most responsible for these deaths on both sides of the border. Project Python, which culminated today, was a long-term, national synchronized enforcement operation with the goal of disrupting, dismantling, and destroying elements of CJNG. CJNG operates on both sides of the border. Here in Los Angeles, a major transshipment hub for CJNG, the operation relied heavily on the use of wiretaps and undercover operatives. The local investigations conducted in concert with our partners resulted in the seizure of more than 1,600 pounds of methamphetamine, 150 pounds of heroin, fentanyl, and other opiates, 28 firearms, and over $5 million in cash. 27 suspects were arrested since the operation began on a variety of significant federal and state charges, and we're still seeking additional suspects at this time.
As we have taken steps to eradicate the most significant criminal organizations that we face, others have attempted to take their place. One of the most significant threats we face now comes from the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known as CJNG. 2 weeks ago, I was in Mexico City meeting with high-level officials from the Mexican Attorney General's office. I can tell you that CJNG operates as a paramilitary force in Mexico, controlling territory, running major methamphetamine labs, and committing extreme acts of violence. CJNG is responsible for much of the methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, and synthetic opioids that we see on our streets, and they use some of that drug money to buy high-powered weapons in the United States. As a result, CJNG is extremely well armed and regularly confronts rival cartels and Mexican security forces. That is why the Department of Justice has deemed CJNG one of the highest priority transnational criminal organizations threats that we face here in the United States.
CJNG was targeted primarily for two reasons: the rapid expansion of territory they control in Mexico, which they accomplished through extreme use of violence and intimidation, and their proficiency in driving the production of synthetic drugs in Mexico. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes El Mencho, the leader of CJNG, is still at large today. The United States government is offering up to $10 million for information leading to his arrest. We have a telephone hotline set up, and the telephone number is 213-237-9990. We also have an email tip line. It's menchotips@usdoj.gov.
So $10 million is a lot of money for just information leading to the arrest of El Mencho, and it's one of the largest rewards ever offered by the DEA. So if you see something, say something. You could make a lot of money. That's it for today's podcast. Thanks for watching The Hot Zone. I'm Chuck Holton.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.